I still remember the smell of old wood and worn leather the first time I stepped into my grandparents' house. Sunlight spilled through lace curtains, catching dust motes that danced in the quiet air. Their home was warm, comforting, a place where love wasn't measured in expectations but in whispered stories and soft laughter. I was 7 when I realized the other part of my family didn't see me that way. My father's shadow stretched across the hallway, tall, imposing, distant. His eyes never lingered on me, only scanning, calculating. My mother was already gone, leaving me to navigate silence and absence like a skill I had no choice but to learn. Grandma would hum in the kitchen, stirring something fragrant in a copper pot. Grandpa would sit in his recliner, newspapers piled high, occasionally lifting a hand in a subtle blessing. And me. I learned to sit quietly, to smile when no one expected it, to exist between the gaps of their attention. It wasn't just neglect. It was the words he didn't say, the invitations I didn't receive, the way my achievements, my small triumphs, were acknowledged with nothing more than a nod, while my sibling successes became family celebrations. When I turned 12, I found out my father had already made plans to leave everything to my sibling. It was a casual remark over a phone call. "I want to make sure Avery gets the house and the savings. She'll need it more than you." The words hung in the air, sharp as shards of glass. I remember the sting in my chest, the metallic taste in my mouth, the way my hands shook as I gripped the kitchen counter for balance. I wanted to scream, cry, demand answers, but instead, I swallowed it all. I learned early, survival meant quiet endurance. Grandparents noticed my silence that night. Grandma's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. "You're stronger than you know, Miranda. And one day, you'll see why." I didn't understand then. How could this quiet, gentle support matter in the face of betrayal? How could small gestures outweigh a lifetime of neglect? That night, as I lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the streetlights outside, I made a silent vow. They may have forgotten me, ignored me, even betrayed me, but one day I would find a way to be seen. And when I discovered the clause my grandparents had quietly inserted into the will years later, I realized this wasn't just a family fight. It was a battle I was born to win. The smell of old books and polished oak filled my grandparents' study as I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through faded legal papers. Sunlight streamed in, catching the dust like tiny golden specks floating in the quiet. Grandpa's hands rested on the desk, fingers interlaced, steady and reassuring. Grandma's knitting needles clicked softly beside the armchair, a rhythmic metronome in the otherwise silent room. "You're going to need this someday," Grandpa said, sliding a thin envelope toward me. His voice was calm but carried weight. I hesitated, fingertips brushing the paper. The envelope was unassuming, almost fragile, but I could feel the importance in its presence. Inside, a neatly folded document revealed a clause tucked within my grandparents' will. One sentence, almost invisible, that could shift everything. In the event of any attempt to bypass Miranda Reed in inheritance, legal recourse shall be permitted to uphold her claim. My heart thudded like a drum in my chest. I read it again, slowly, savoring the words. For the first time, someone in my family had put a measure of protection directly into my hands, a safeguard against the father who had already made it clear he wanted to erase me. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Grandpa's eyes softened. "We didn't want you to know too soon. Strength comes from patience, Miranda. And sometimes, the quietest power is the one you don't realize you have until it matters most." Grandma reached over, smoothing my hair back from my face. "We love you, honey. You've always deserved this chance." Her voice trembled just slightly, betraying the emotion she tried to mask. I clenched the paper, the corners pressing into my palms. Warmth and fear mingled in my stomach. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in years, but also the shadow of responsibility. With this clause came the understanding that if I ever chose to act, I would be taking on the entire force of my father's control. That night, lying in my room, I stared at the ceiling. The clause felt like a weapon, a key, and a warning all at once. My father had never imagined I had a way to fight back. Not one iota of suspicion had crossed his mind, and that thought alone sent a thrill, tinged with fear, racing through me. I could almost hear him now, dismissive and smug, unaware that a quiet storm was forming. I folded the clause back into the envelope and slipped it under my pillow. The weight of possibility pressed against me like a physical force. Could I really stand up to him? Could I challenge the man who had controlled my life, belittled my accomplishments, and tried to erase me entirely? The answer burned in me like fire. I would try. Because sometimes the smallest secret is the deadliest tool, and my grandparents had just handed me mine. The office smelled like polished wood and faint coffee. I sat across from the lawyer, legs crossed, trying to steady the jitter in my hands. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, their edges sharp, cutting through the quiet like silent warnings. Outside, the city hummed, distant sirens, car horns, the occasional bark of a dog, a world that carried on without knowing the weight of what I was about to hear. "I'm sorry, Miranda," the lawyer said, her tone professional but gentle. "Your father has finalized the will. Everything is designated to Avery. There's no room for negotiation." The words landed like a sledgehammer. My chest tightened, throat dry. I gripped the armrests so hard my knuckles whitened. Everything? My share? My grandparents' intentions? She hesitated. "There's a clause for legal recourse if someone attempts to bypass you. But your father clearly tried to bypass you." I felt a swirl of betrayal, grief, and disbelief crash over me at once. The father I had trusted, the man whose opinion had haunted my thoughts for years, had deliberately erased me. My mind raced back to every birthday he'd missed, every achievement ignored, every small smile I'd hoped to earn, every check I'd written to cover family expenses, every time I'd stayed silent to avoid conflict. And now, this. I clenched my fists under the desk, nails digging into my palms. I could taste the metallic tang of anger on my tongue. My heart beat like a drum in a silent hall, each pulse echoing the unfairness of it all. Then I remembered the clause my grandparents had left me. A spark of hope flared, mingling with a storm of rage. It was subtle, almost hidden, but powerful. A legal backdoor, a chance to fight back, to claim what was rightfully mine. I could almost see my father's smug face, imagining that I would accept this, stay silent, let him win. But the clause gave me a weapon, and for the first time in years, I felt the tide turning. "I won't be ignored," I whispered under my breath. "Not this time." That night, lying awake, I traced the lines of the clause in my mind. The possibilities were terrifying, the legal battles, the confrontations, the anger waiting to be unleashed. But the alternative was worse. Silence, invisibility, a lifetime of being someone else's shadow. I didn't know how to fight yet. I didn't know if I had the strength to face him in court. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let him erase me again. And when I finally picked up the phone to start the investigation, I realized this fight would cost more than I could imagine. The hum of my laptop filled the quiet apartment, mingling with the faint drip of the kitchen faucet. Papers were scattered across the table. Financial statements, old letters, account summaries, the evidence of a life manipulated from behind closed doors. I traced the lines with my finger, feeling the weight of each number, each signature. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink, grounding me as I dug deeper into the story my father had tried to hide. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. The city outside glittered with evening lights, but inside, I felt the walls closing in. Every document, every email, every bank statement was a small thread in the web my father had spun. And I had to pull on them all, slowly, carefully, without snapping the delicate threads too soon. Each discovery hit me harder than the last. Unauthorized transfers, misdirected inheritance, subtle manipulations disguised as family obligations. I could feel my chest tighten as the betrayal unfolded in black and white. My father's signature, calm and practiced, stared back at me from the papers, proof of deliberate deceit. I ran my hands over my face, trying to breathe through the storm. I had trusted him. I had believed he would honor my grandparents' wishes. And he had lied. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, intimate, a violation of every boundary I'd ever hoped he would respect. And yet, somewhere in that mess of numbers and signatures, I felt a spark of power. I had the truth. And truth, I reminded myself, could be sharper than anger. Then I found it, an irregularity buried deep in one of the statements. A payment made under my name, approved without my knowledge. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was criminal. My father hadn't just ignored me, he had actively used my identity to shield his plans, to manipulate the system, and to pretend he was doing nothing wrong. I froze, the room suddenly too quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded like a judge's gavel in my ears. My heart pounded in sync with the blinking cursor on the screen. If I exposed this, the consequences could be explosive. Lawsuits, confrontation, humiliation, every risk I had feared suddenly felt very real. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharp. I realized I had crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just uncovering lies. I was preparing to fight. And as I dialed the lawyer's number to discuss my next steps, I felt the first thrill of fear and anticipation ripple through me. This investigation would be dangerous, exhausting, and personal. But one thought rang louder than any fear. If I don't act, no one else will. And I refused to be invisible any longer. The courthouse loomed ahead, stone and glass glinting in the morning sun. I clutched my bag a little too tightly, nails pressing into leather as my heartbeat echoed in my ears. The air smelled faintly of rain and dust, and every step toward the entrance felt heavier than the last. Inside, the lobby buzzed with whispered conversations, heels clicking against polished floors, the occasional metallic clink of a gavel from another courtroom. I found my seat across from the lawyer, who rifled through files with a calm efficiency I envied. My palms were sweaty, my chest tight. For years, I had imagined this moment, standing up to my father, demanding recognition, claiming what was mine. And now, the dream of justice felt terrifyingly real. When my father entered the courtroom, time seemed to slow. He looked exactly as I remembered, composed, confident, untouchable. His eyes scanned the room but never met mine, as though he assumed I would sit quietly, swallowed by the role he had always assigned me. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe. Not this time. The opening statements began. My lawyer spoke clearly, methodically, presenting evidence of the will, the clause my grandparents had left, and my father's attempts to bypass me. The words felt both distant and immediate, like echoes of a past I had lived and a future I was claiming. Then came the first blow, an objection. My father's attorney, calm and precise, challenged a piece of evidence, claiming it wasn't valid. I felt my stomach drop, my palms grow slick again. The judge raised an eyebrow, scanning the documents. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Every detail mattered, every signature could tip the scales. I glanced at my father. He didn't smile. But I could see it in the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Confidence, smugness. He thinks he can outmaneuver me. The judge leaned back, fingertips steepled, eyes narrowing. I will review this evidence carefully before proceeding. The words were calm, almost neutral, but in that moment, the weight of possibility pressed down on me like stone. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension settle only to rise again. My hands shook under the table. I realized that this lawsuit wasn't just legal, it was a test of every nerve, every lesson, every ounce of courage I had cultivated in a lifetime of neglect. And when the judge finally said, "We will continue tomorrow morning," I felt a thrill and a chill at the same time. One day closer to justice, one day closer to confrontation. The courtroom felt colder than usual that morning, the air heavy with polished wood and faint echoes of murmured conversations. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the soft fabric brushing against my arms, a fragile comfort in the sterile room. The sunlight outside made the floorboards glint, almost mocking me with their indifferent shine. I had prepared, double-checked every document, every piece of evidence. Every shred of proof was meticulously organized. I believed I was ready for whatever my father and his lawyers could throw at me. But nothing could have prepared me for how far he would go. He called witnesses I didn't expect, old family friends, accountants who twisted words and numbers like acrobats, casting doubt on my every claim. My stomach twisted as they spoke, the words sharp and precise, insinuating I was overreacting, imagining slights, even being ungrateful. I clenched my fists under the table. My fingers dug into my palms, nails cutting into skin, a small reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. I felt anger swirl in my chest, a heat that refused to be ignored. Every smirk from my father's side, every calm inflection of his lawyer's voice, stung like salt on an open wound. Then came the bombshell. A call from my lawyer outside the courtroom. An unexpected affidavit had been submitted, a claim that could invalidate one of my key pieces of evidence. I felt my knees go weak, the floor tilting slightly beneath me. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore, I realized. This was a war of control, manipulation, and power. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, each echo of a gavel a hammer striking my resolve. My father's eyes met mine across the aisle, calm, calculating. I could almost hear him thinking, "You can't win. You're alone." I inhaled slowly, tasting the metallic tang of tension in my mouth. My mind raced. There had to be a way to turn this around, to find the leverage he hadn't accounted for. And then it clicked, the clause. The one thing my grandparents had left me that my father thought he could outsmart. The weapon I hadn't fully deployed yet. I leaned back, heart hammering, palms sweaty, the courtroom noise fading to a dull roar. Tomorrow I would strike back. But the question lingered, icy and sharp. Would it be enough to finally make him see me, not as an inconvenience, but as someone who could never be ignored again? The courtroom smelled of polished wood and faint, recycled air, a sterile scent that made my stomach twist with anticipation. I gripped the edge of the table, fingertips pressing into the smooth surface as the judge called the session to order. Outside, the late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, painting streaks of gold across the floor, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every year, every slight, every ignored birthday, every check I had written in silent obedience. All of it had led here, to this moment, where truth and justice could collide. My father sat across from me, posture impeccable, suit crisp, expression unreadable. He looked like a man who had never lost, never been challenged. His attorney whispered into his ear, and a smug smirk crossed his face. My pulse quickened. He thinks he's untouchable. The first witness was called. My lawyer laid out the evidence with meticulous care. The will, the clause my grandparents had left, the unauthorized financial moves my father had made. Each paper slid across the table like a small hammer strike, each point punctuated by the soft scratching of pens and the rustle of legal documents. Then, my father's attorney rose. Calm, methodical, he tried to twist the narrative, casting doubt on the authenticity of the clause. I felt my chest tighten, a sudden chill crawling over my skin. Every nerve in my body screamed. My father's eyes met mine, a silent challenge. Give up now. But I didn't. I took a breath, let the courtroom fade to white noise around me. I spoke clearly, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I held the clause before the judge. This document was legally inserted by my grandparents. Any attempt to bypass it is not just unfair, it is unlawful. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. I could hear the faint tick of the courtroom clock, the hum of the ventilation, the almost imperceptible intake of breath from the gallery. Every detail mattered. My father opened his mouth, and for a moment I feared he would strike back verbally with the force of years of manipulation. But before he could, the judge's gavel came down with a decisive thunk. I will review all submitted evidence thoroughly before issuing a ruling. Court is adjourned until tomorrow. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave my shoulders in a long, shuddering sigh. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time, I felt the tide turn. As I stepped out into the hallway, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the marble floor. My father's smirk lingered in my mind, a reminder that the fight was far from finished. Tomorrow I would face him again. Tomorrow everything could change. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving echoes of whispered conversations and the faint scent of polished wood in the air. I lingered in my seat for a moment, fingertips grazing the edge of the table, feeling its smooth surface like a lifeline to reality. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching the dust motes floating lazily in the air. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the storm that had just passed within these walls. I let out a long breath, the kind that carries both relief and tension. The first wave of the fight was over, but the war was far from finished. My father's face haunted me, calm, composed, smug, yet beneath it, I could feel the faint tremor of uncertainty, the crack in his armor I had worked so hard to expose. I walked to the small cafe across the street, the smell of brewing coffee and warm pastries grounding me. Each sip burned slightly, a reminder that I was alive, that I had survived another round of battle. I replayed every moment in my mind, the gavel striking, the judge's penetrating gaze, the subtle shift in the courtroom air when my evidence was presented. I realized just how much power my voice and presence held. Yet, alongside that empowerment, there was exhaustion. Years of betrayal, manipulation, and silent compliance weighed on me like a chain. My grandparents had trusted me with their secret, the clause hidden in plain sight, and I had the responsibility now, not just to myself but to their legacy. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the folder of court documents once again. Evidence, affidavits, signatures, all lined up neatly. I realized my father had already begun quietly trying to maneuver, calling lawyers, whispering into offices, attempting to sow doubt even before the final ruling. I felt a familiar chill. He wasn't just a man who ignored me, he was a strategist, a manipulator, and now a desperate one. My heartbeat picked up as I understood that my next steps would have to be precise. One wrong move, and everything could unravel. I set the documents down and gazed out the window at the city lights twinkling against the night sky. I could hear the faint hum of traffic below, the distant wail of a siren. I clenched my fists, feeling both fear and resolve in equal measure. Tomorrow, the next move would be mine. I picked up my phone and began drafting the first call, the first message, the first step toward exposing the full truth. The quiet in the apartment was heavy, almost expectant, like the pause before a storm breaks. And deep down, I knew, the revelation that would follow could change everything. The city lights flickered against the windowpane, painting my apartment in streaks of gold and silver. I sat at the edge of my couch, laptop open but ignored, the hum of its fan blending with the distant hum of traffic outside. The scent of leftover coffee lingered in the air, bitter and grounding. I was waiting, not for a person, but for a shift, a signal that the next phase of this fight was beginning. My phone vibrated sharply, startling me. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Hesitation hung in the air for a split second, then I answered. "Miss Reed," a crisp, professional female voice asked. "This is Lauren Stein, legal representative for Capital One in Colorado. I'm calling to inform you your fraud report has escalated, and our team has coordinated with local law enforcement to verify transactions tonight at Cherry Creek events. You're not required to attend, but we wanted you notified." I froze, a jolt of adrenaline running through me. The sweet 16. My mother. Avery. The evidence I had gathered, the fraud report, the calls, the documents, it all converged in this single moment. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I could almost hear the faint whisper of past betrayals, every slight my father had committed, every lie my mother had told. I realized the power of what I'd set in motion. The voice on the other end continued, calmly, clearly, legal steps, verification procedures, law enforcement coordination. I listened, nodding even though she couldn't see me, each word a confirmation that the game had changed. The first text came almost immediately after. "Are you insane? The police just showed up. Everyone's staring. Mom's freaking out." Then another. "They're calling your name. Avery is confused. What did you do?" I sank back into the couch, the edges pressing against my back, grounding me as the magnitude of my actions hit. I hadn't acted blindly. I hadn't acted without evidence. But seeing the storm ripple outward, knowing my family's carefully constructed world was cracking, a strange mix of satisfaction and tension surged through me. I could feel the weight of the past pressing against me, every ignored achievement, every stolen opportunity, every moment of silence I had endured, and now it was finally, irrefutably, on display. Outside, the faint sound of sirens drifted up, blending with the soft hum of the city night. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled slowly, letting the tension melt into a controlled calm. Tomorrow, the fallout would reach its peak. Tomorrow, my family would have to face the truth, and nothing would be the same again. And in that quiet pause before the storm, I realized justice was no longer an idea. It was happening. Morning light spilled across my apartment floor, soft and forgiving, painting everything gold. I sat at the edge of my couch, the hum of the city beneath me like a gentle heartbeat. The laptop screen glowed faintly, displaying emails confirming the fraud investigation's resolution. My hands rested on my knees, feeling the subtle warmth of the sunlight, the calm after months of tension and betrayal. For the first time in years, I didn't feel frantic, defensive, or exhausted. The documents lay in neat piles: my grandparents' clause, the fraud report, the final confirmation letter from the bank. 3 proofs of everything I had fought for: effort, protection, freedom. The city outside carried on, indifferent to the battles fought in a small apartment. Yet I felt a quiet triumph in every corner of this space. Each breath was mine. Each decision I had made, every boundary I had set, had led here. I brewed a cup of tea, the steam curling and rising like a soft victory, the scent grounding me. I remembered the years of silent compliance, the stolen money, the empty celebrations, the phone calls that demanded more than I had to give. And I realized I hadn't just survived. I had reclaimed my life. The final piece of closure came quietly. Emails from the bank confirmed my mother's acknowledgement of unauthorized use and her agreement to repay. No apologies, no drama, just the truth, simple and absolute. The weight lifted off my shoulders, leaving space for clarity and peace. I walked to the window and looked at the city below. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, a reminder of the storm that had passed. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph in vengeance. I felt balance. I had stood up, protected myself, and emerged intact, stronger than ever. 6 months later, autumn leaves painted Denver in gold and amber. I started a new job, surrounded by people who valued me for my skill, my mind, my effort, not for what I could provide for them. On my wall hung 3 things: my diploma, my new employee badge, and the locksmith's receipt. Together, they told a single story: effort, protection, and freedom. I opened the window that evening, letting the crisp night air spill in. The city hummed below, alive, indifferent, beautiful. And I realized the quiet wasn't emptiness anymore. It was a sound I could finally call mine. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself, reclaim what's yours, or finally change the locks on someone who tried to control you, you're not alone. And one day, the quiet will feel like victory. And that was the day I finally took back what was mine. No apologies, no explanations, just peace, quiet, and proof that I could stand on my own. Have you ever had to fight for yourself, to set boundaries that others refuse to respect? Comment below. I want to hear your story. If this story gave you chills, inspired you, or reminded you to protect what's yours, smash that like button. And for more cinematic, emotional revenge stories that hit you right in the heart, subscribe and turn on notifications.